Previously, on the Rake, case 452, a man alone in his house, a voice trembling on the other end of a 911 line, breathing that wasn't his, clicking, deliberate and close, and white eyes staring from where no light could ever reach. We heard it crawl, we heard it climb, until the call ended the same way so many do, with that same whispered warning: stay awake. But the last thing left on the console wasn't a scream. It wasn't even his voice. It was a line of text. Case 452 linked to Glenwood Motel, room 6. Tonight, we go there. Before we begin, if you've been following this story, you know every detail matters. Subscribe to the Midnight Codex and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. And after you watch, tell me in the comments, what would you do if you saw those eyes in the dark? Now, let's check into room 6. The screen fades in from black, not with a clean cut, but through a slow bleed of gray and static. Thin horizontal lines drift lazily across the frame, like ghosts trapped in the feed. Every few seconds, the image twitches, as if the tape is straining to hold it together. The sound comes first. A low, constant hiss, the kind that doesn't just fill the silence, it becomes the silence. Underneath, there's a faint, irregular hum, not mechanical, not quite natural, and then the brittle, fluttering pop of a tape reel catching before it spins on. The picture settles into a fixed shot, black and white, grainy. A cold, square view of a steel autopsy table, perfectly centered in the frame. Overhead lights hang just out of shot, their glare bouncing off the brushed metal surface in harsh, unforgiving streaks. The reflection shivers slightly with each flicker of the fluorescent tubes above, washing the room in alternating shades of sterile white and deep shadow. In the near corner of the table, angled just toward the camera, is a laminated placard. Even through the distortion, the bold type is sharp. Subject R09, classified. A faint ring of moisture halos one corner of the card, a slow droplet sliding down and pooling on the metal. For several seconds, the frame remains empty. No movement, just the hum of the ventilation fans, a soft metallic rattle as if somewhere in the ducts, a loose screw trembles with each rotation. A sharper clink interrupts, something small, metal, tapped against the table. Then, from the far left, two figures step into view. They move with the detached precision of people who have done this 100 times before, and perhaps wish they hadn't done it at all. The first is tall, broad-shouldered beneath a white protective gown. The disposable mask conceals most of his face, but the deep crease between his brows is visible even in monochrome. His hands are gloved in latex, the pale surface powdered and faintly creased at the knuckles. The second figure is shorter, slighter, following half a step behind, carrying a stainless steel tray whose surface glints under the lights. The taller man's voice cuts through the hiss, flat and clinical. Recording for internal archive. Autopsy of subject number R09, recovered near Glenwood Motel. The words echo slightly in the tiled room, their sharpness softened only by the dull mechanical undercurrent of the fans. The camera doesn't move. There's no cameraman here, just a fixed mounted unit in the corner, its lens unwavering, unblinking. The stillness of the framing makes every motion in the shot feel more deliberate. Between the two figures, lying centered on the table, is a shape under a white sheet. It is too rigid to be mistaken for anything but a body. The fabric is pulled tight over its form, but not perfectly. There are rises and hollows where bone and muscle shape the contours beneath. At the end closest to the camera, the sheet has slipped back just enough to expose part of one hand. Even in monochrome, the details are stark. The skin is pale, almost waxen, but broken by dark, jagged crescents where the fingernails should be. The nails, what's left of them, are splintered, cracked, some sheared almost to the quick. The fingers themselves curl slightly inward, stiff in a posture that seems halfway between a fist and the reaching grip of something caught mid-motion. The joints bulge, not from swelling, but from a kind of unnatural rigidity. One finger, the index, angles away from the rest at an odd, strained angle, as though it had been forced back until the tendons gave way. The doctor sets a clipboard down near the placard, the paper crisp against the metal. He doesn't look at the hand. His gaze stays fixed somewhere just below the top of the sheet, as if the rest of the body is already demanding his attention, even through the covering. The assistant, meanwhile, adjusts the tray on the far counter, the faint scrape of metal on tile marking the movement. For a moment, the sound changes. Not much, but enough. A faint warble runs through the hiss, bending the pitch like a tape that's slipping. It's brief, only a second or two before smoothing back to its steady static. Neither figure reacts. The doctor moves to the side of the table, his hands resting lightly on the sheet. He pauses, glancing at the assistant, then back at the camera, not to acknowledge it, but perhaps to confirm it's still running. The fluorescent light above flickers once, a quick stutter that briefly deepens the shadows under the table before returning to full glare. When he speaks again, his tone is still even, still clinical, but there's a weight in the way he says the number. Subject recovered 73 hours after initial incident. Body condition, irregular. Proceeding with external examination. The assistant takes a step closer, standing just at the head of the table. The sheet shifts slightly under the doctor's grip, the soft sound of fabric over fabric, and the exposed hand turns a fraction. Or perhaps it only seems to, the shadow changing as the cloth moves. From the far wall, the ventilation system gives a low, drawn-out groan, as though the fan blades are pushing against something heavier than air. The hum steadies again, but the moment leaves a thin layer of tension in the room. The camera, unblinking, holds the frame as the doctor reaches for the edge of the sheet. His gloved fingers pinch the fabric, ready to peel it back, and in that still second before he moves, the image flickers, just a minor glitch, no more than 2 frames, but enough to distort the placard's letters into a smear before they snap back into focus. The assistant glances at the monitor on the far wall, the one linked to the camera feed. She hesitates, just a fraction of a second, before looking back to the table. The sheet begins to draw down, slow, deliberate. The sound of it moving is louder than expected, catching slightly over the contours beneath. The hand, fully exposed now, lies stiff and unmoving, its fractured nails dull against the stainless steel. The doctor doesn't stop, revealing more of the form beneath as the frame holds steady, the opening moments of an examination that should be routine, but never will be. The doctor's gloved fingers tighten on the sheet. The fluorescent glare above spills down the crisp folds of fabric, making the white almost too bright for the grainy black and white frame. He draws it back slowly, each inch exposing something more of the shape beneath. The sound is soft, fabric rasping over skin and steel, but in the stillness of the room it cuts through like paper tearing. The first reveal is the curve of a shoulder, unnaturally rigid, the skin stretched taut over bone. The camera's static hum fills the moment, as though even it is holding its breath. The sheet slides further, uncovering the chest, and the details begin to register. It is a man, mid-30s, maybe older, but the condition of the body makes it hard to guess. The skin is pale to the point of translucence, but mottled with blotches so dark they appear almost black on the monochrome feed. Bruises bloom across his torso in no obvious pattern, some rounded, some in long streaks as though made by something dragging across him. The face is the last part revealed, and the first detail that forces the assistant to look away for a moment. His features are wrong. The jaw is pulled off center, not broken in one clean fracture, but wrenched sideways as if forced there and left. The mouth hangs slightly open, the lips dried and cracked. Teeth are visible, but not aligned. They appear shoved against the inside of his cheek. One eye is half-lidded, the other open just enough to catch the glare of the overhead light, reflecting it in a way that makes it seem wet, alive, though the rest of him is not. The camera's autofocus hums faintly, adjusting to the new view. The lens moves closer, a slow zoom to document the yow's surface trauma. The view glides down over the torso, and it's here that the worst of it is clear. Deep gashes rake across the chest in parallel lines, not clean, but torn, as if whatever made them didn't cut so much as rip through. The flesh is ragged at the edges, bruising radiating outward like a halo of damage around each mark. Both forearms bear similar wounds, long, deep scratches that run from the elbow to the wrist. The hands themselves are curled in stiff rigor, the nails jagged and broken down to the quick. The grainy filter of the footage doesn't hide the texture of dried blood clinging under the remaining nails, clotted dark against the pale skin. The assistant leans in, clipboard in hand, her eyes moving between the wounds and the sheet of notes she's holding. Her voice is steady when she reads, steady but a little too quick. Victim identified as male, 34 years old, reported missing 48 hours prior to recovery, located approximately 1.6 miles from Glenwood Motel. Condition, listed as partial decomposition. Ambient temperature at recovery site, 17 degrees Celsius. No environmental factors to account for tissue degradation. The doctor glances at her, then at the body again. His eyes scan the bruising, the claw marks, the unnatural posture of the limbs. He tilts his head slightly as though something about the pattern is bothering him. His voice is low when he speaks, but it's caught perfectly by the mic above the table. The tissue degradation is inconsistent. Almost. He pauses, his gaze narrowing on one of the deeper gashes. Accelerated. The camera's zoom continues until the wound fills the frame. The edges are sharp enough to suggest recent infliction, yet the surrounding tissue looks aged, as if weeks have passed instead of hours. As the focus sharpens, something strange happens. The border of the wound, where light meets shadow, blooms faintly, a soft halo effect that isn't natural to the lighting. The image trembles just enough to suggest the tape catching on a damaged section. For 2 seconds, the edges of the frame pulse with a faint white outline, as if the wound itself is radiating something the lens can't quite capture. The assistant doesn't seem to notice she's flipping a page on the clipboard, but the doctor stops, leaning closer, his head blocking the overhead glare for a moment. The sudden shadow across the chest changes the texture of the injuries. In darkness, the gouges look deeper, less like tears in flesh and more like voids, holes leading into something darker beneath. The static in the background shifts slightly, a subtle warble as though the audio is bending. The doctor straightens again, allowing the light to flood back over the body. The effect is gone, just wounds again. He moves to the arm, lifting it gently, rotating the wrist to show the damage to the nails. His thumb presses lightly against the pad of the finger, revealing the cracked skin underneath. The latex squeaks faintly against the dryness. He looks up at the camera, as if silently instructing the operator, though of course there is no one behind the lens. The zoom shifts to the hand, lingering on the jagged nail edges and the clots beneath. The assistant's voice breaks the moment. Cause of death, pending internal examination. But given the condition, she stops herself, glancing at the doctor, who simply nods for her to continue. Given the condition, defensive wounds are consistent with high-resistance scratching, nails broken during prolonged contact with a resistant surface. The doctor sets the hand back down. The fingers remain in their twisted curl, unmoving. For a second, the camera's light balance drifts, the white sheet behind the arm dimming into gray before snapping back to bright. It's the kind of artifact you expect from old footage, but it happens again, this time when the doctor's hand passes near the torso. There's a faint momentary flare at the edge of the wound, the same halo from before, but weaker, almost as if the camera is reacting to more than just light. The assistant steps back to the counter, setting the clipboard down with a metallic tap. The sound echoes briefly, swallowed quickly by the fan's steady drone. The doctor looks back to the placard at the head of the table, his expression unreadable behind the mask. Subject R09. Inconsistent tissue state. Possible exposure to unknown environmental factor, he says, his tone as if for the record, though there's a weight behind the words that makes them feel less certain. The camera holds on the body as he moves to prepare for the next stage. In the close-up frame, the hand with the broken nails seems to rest heavier against the steel, the shadow beneath it just slightly darker than before. The doctor shifts position, stepping closer to the left side of the table. The overhead light catches on the curve of the body, the steel edges reflecting thin white lines. His gloved hands reach for the victim's arm, not with force, but with the measured care of someone who knows exactly how easily this kind of work can go wrong. He lifts the limb just enough to test the joints. Even in the grainy monochrome, The unnatural stiffness is obvious. The elbow bends, but not along the normal arc. Instead, it gives slightly, then catches at a wrong angle, the bones beneath the skin jutting subtly against their natural alignment. The doctor adjusts his grip, rotates the wrist. The joint moves, but reluctantly, like the tendons are pulled too tight. The joints are rigid. His voice is calm, clinical, but the angles are atypical. He turns the hand palm up, then back down, noting the way the knuckles seem to resist the motion. The camera's lens follows, sliding in closer. The detail sharpens, skin marbled pale and gray, the faint stretch marks where the flesh has been forced. On one finger, the knuckle bends backward just enough to suggest it was once forced further, far enough to tear something inside. Satisfied, the doctor lowers the arm, the hand resting once more against the steel table. He moves toward the head of the body. The assistant adjusts position, staying opposite him so the camera keeps a clear line of sight. His gloved fingers press gently against the victim's neck, tracing a path just under the jawline. "There's indentation here," he says quietly, not looking at the camera. Crescent-shaped, roughly uniform spacing. The camera zooms in, the monochrome highlighting the subtle dip in the skin, a curve deepened at one end, like the impression left by a sharp edge pressed in too long. Around the mark, faint bruising blooms in arcs, suggesting more than one point of contact. Possible fingernail or tooth pattern, he adds, his tone careful. The assistant scribbles a note without looking up. He tilts the head slightly, the light grazing across the throat. More of the indentations come into view, not a single bite or grip, but multiple overlapping marks, each angled differently, as if whatever made them had shifted its hold. Then, without warning, he slides his thumb and forefinger to the victim's eyelids. "Eyes," he says simply, and lifts the upper lid. The camera catches it perfectly, a pupil blown wide, so dilated that only the faint rim of the iris is visible. The surface is clouded, not opaque, but with a sheen that catches the light in a way living eyes never do. Around the sclera, thin tendrils of dark blood radiate from the edges like cracks in porcelain, the veins deeper in tone than usual, a deep, almost black red even in monochrome. The doctor tilts the head toward the light, and the pupil stays fixed. No contraction, no reaction. Maximal dilation, clouding present, scleral injection, severe. He releases the lid, letting it fall shut. As the lens pulls back for a wider shot of the head, something shifts at the far edge of the frame. It's subtle, a dark blur at the very border of the image, there and gone in less than a second. The kind of movement you catch in your peripheral vision, too quick to focus on. The static hum deepens, a faint grain crawling into the audio. The change lasts barely a moment before smoothing out again. Neither the doctor nor the assistant reacts. The doctor moves to the opposite side, repeating the process with the other eye. This time, as the lid lifts, the camera's exposure stutters. The brightness surges slightly, haloing the eye in a wash of pale gray before settling. The same dilation, the same clouding, the same branching veins like frost spreading across glass. He steps back, speaking for the record. Possible predatory attack. No evident defensive wounds, beyond the claw marks already noted. The assistant glances at him briefly, a look that seems to ask if he's going to elaborate. He doesn't. Instead, he leans forward one last time, adjusting the victim's head. His hands stay steady, but there's a faint pause before he pulls back, as though something in the posture or in the way the skin feels under the gloves has given him reason to hesitate. The camera lingers on the face, the slack mouth, the off-center jaw, the stillness that isn't just death, but something deeper, an absence of life that feels deliberate. For a long moment, the room is filled only with the low hum of the vents and the faint tick of metal as the table's surface cools beneath the lights. Then, the doctor straightens, his shadow sliding across the victim's chest, and nods to the assistant. Without another word, they prepare to move on to the next stage. The doctor shifts slightly, reaching for the scalpel laid out on the small instrument tray beside him. The blade is thin, narrow, polished to a mirror finish that catches the overhead glare in a single sharp line. His gloved fingers wrap around the handle, the latex creasing faintly under the pressure. The assistant steps closer, clipboard now tucked under one arm, her hands free. The faint squeak of her shoes against the tiled floor seems too loud in the room's otherwise sterile hum. The camera holds steady, its unblinking eye fixed on the center of the table. The placard with subject R09. Classified remains visible in the corner of the frame, a constant reminder of the body's designation and the secrecy surrounding it. The doctor positions himself at the upper end of the table, just to the left of the victim's sternum. "Initial incision," he says quietly, more for the record than for the assistant. The scalpel tip lowers, making first contact just below the notch of the breastbone. The instant metal touches skin, the picture jumps. A stutter of light runs across the feed, the monochrome frame flashing bright, washing out the details for less than a heartbeat. In that blinding instant, one, maybe two frames at most, something else is in the room. Behind the doctor, beyond the halo of the overhead lights, a shape stands against the far wall. It is tall, unnaturally so. Thin, its limbs held too close to its sides. The head is bowed, the neck angled forward in a way that looks wrong, like the weight is pulling it down instead of bone holding it up. There are no facial details, just the pale, smooth impression of a head in the monochrome static. The figure is there, clear enough to register, and then it's gone. The frame snaps back to normal, the incision already begun, the doctor's hands moving with practiced precision. Neither he nor the assistant reacts. If they saw it, they give no sign. The only sound is the soft, wet whisper of blade through skin. The scalpel moves in a steady line, cutting from the sternum down toward the navel. The skin parts cleanly under the blade, the pale tissue beneath faintly, glistening in the harsh light. The doctor's hand is steady, guiding the incision to an even depth. "Midline cut, sternum to pubis," he narrates. The assistant writes quickly, her eyes flicking from the body to her notes. As the doctor reaches the lower end of the cut, he switches grip, setting the scalpel aside on a tray. He picks up a pair of rib spreaders. The metal gleams cold in the frame, and begins to draw the skin and muscle back from the chest cavity. The motion is smooth, controlled, but as the layers pull apart, something in the texture catches his attention. The muscle fiber isn't uniform. It isn't the clean striation of normal anatomy. There are disruptions, jagged lines running perpendicular to the incision, splitting through muscle bundles as though something had torn outward from within. The edges of these tears are irregular, frayed, as if they've been ripped by force rather than sliced. The doctor leans closer, his brow furrowing above the mask. Tearing present in pectoral and abdominal muscle tissue, inconsistent with external injury. The camera adjusts focus automatically, zooming slightly toward the exposed area. The monochrome sharpens the texture, making the torn fibers appear darker, more chaotic. The assistant steps to the side for a clearer view, but in doing so, she glances briefly toward the far wall, the same stretch of blank tile where, just moments ago, the pale figure had stood in the flicker. Her gaze lingers there for a fraction longer than necessary before she looks back at the table. She says nothing. The doctor shifts to examine the lower abdomen. He pulls back another flap of skin, revealing more internal tearing, this time in the oblique muscles, the fibers peeled in thin strips. The pattern is wrong. It doesn't follow the logic of trauma from a weapon, nor the scatter of damage from an animal attack. The assistant breaks the silence, her voice low. The pattern, it's reversed. The doctor glances up, meeting her eyes briefly before looking back down. Yes, the force was applied from the inside. He doesn't speculate further, simply continues the examination. In the background, the static on the audio track thickens, rising in volume just enough to be noticeable. It carries a faint fluctuation, a rise and fall like breathing, though slower, heavier. The doctor and assistant continue as if nothing has changed. The camera's focus shifts slightly again, adjusting to the glint of the rib spreaders. For half a second, at the very edge of the frame, a blur moves, just enough to disrupt the corner pixels, and then is gone. The static fades back to its baseline hiss. The doctor pauses to document the internal damage verbally, each word measured. Multiple internal lacerations, Directionality suggests outward pressure, no corresponding external trauma aside from surface claw marks. He steps back slightly, removing his gloves and pulling on a fresh pair. The snap of latex is loud against the otherwise muted background. The assistant takes a single step backward, not enough to be obvious, but enough to put more space between herself and the far wall. The doctor resumes, carefully adjusting the retractors to widen the incision. The exposed cavity glistens under the harsh lighting, but the damage inside is more extensive than before, faint fissures running deeper into the muscle layers that attach to the ribs. The assistant's pen hesitates over her clipboard. She glances again toward the corner, her eyes narrow, but she doesn't speak. The camera lingers on the open incision. For a moment, nothing moves. Then, a faint flicker of the lighting shifts the shadows inside the cavity. The jagged tears appear deeper, darker, almost hollow. The light returns to normal, and the illusion is gone. The doctor straightens, nodding to the assistant. Record internal tearing patterns, upper to lower abdomen. Possible post-mortem origin, but atypical. As he turns to select the next instrument, the frame holds on the exposed body. The placard remains in view, the text sharp against the steel. In the top right corner of the shot, a faint ghosting appears. Two pale shapes, one above the other, aligned like the beginnings of eyes. They remain for less than a second, then dissolve into static. The doctor returns to the table, unaware, his hands already moving for the next step in the procedure. The assistant writes quickly, avoiding another glance at the wall. The static hum settles. The flicker does not return. The doctor's hands move with the precision of long practice, but there's a hesitation in his posture now, as if each step forward in this examination is revealing something that's making the next step harder to take. He reaches for a long, slender pair of surgical forceps, the steel catching a thin streak of light as he lifts it from the tray. The assistant adjusts her position, stepping closer to the head of the table to make room at the torso. The camera holds its fixed angle, its grainy monochrome pulling every detail into harsh contrast. He works methodically, beginning at the upper chest. The rib spreaders keep the cavity open, the skin and muscle drawn taut at the edges. His gloved fingers, guided by the forceps, reach deep into the exposed space. The latex squeaks faintly against wet tissue. When he lifts the first lung free, it comes with a sound, a soft, reluctant separation, like something unpeeling. The organ, limp and pale in the black and white feed, hangs heavy between the metal tips of the forceps. Even through the distortion, something is wrong. The camera's lens zooms automatically, centering on the lung as he turns it for inspection. Along its inner surface, the side that should be smooth, intact, there are lines. Thin, uneven. Some no longer than an inch, others curving in shallow arcs. But they aren't surface scratches. They run from the inside out, each one a tear in the tissue wall, the edges frayed inwards as though something had pressed from within and forced its way through. The doctor tilts the lung, examining the pattern. Multiple internal incisions, inconsistent with sharp force trauma, not consistent with animal bite patterns. His tone is steady but quieter than before. The assistant scribbles notes without looking up. The lung is placed on the steel tray beside the table. The sound of it hitting the surface is a dull, wet thud that echoes briefly in the tiled room. The doctor's gloved hands disappear into the cavity again, reaching deeper this time. The rib cage creaks faintly with the shift in pressure. The second lung comes free with more resistance, as though the tissue is clinging to the interior. When it finally lifts into view, the pattern repeats. Dozens of tiny ruptures, all facing outward, none resembling the clean slice of a blade or the tearing arc of an animal claw. The camera lingers on the damage as the organ is placed beside the first. The monochrome grain catches on each irregular edge, each thin flap of tissue. As the doctor reaches for the next instrument, the camera shifts its focus slightly, following his movement toward the smaller stainless steel tray on the opposite side. The moment the lens swings, the entire image shivers. A soft, momentary shake that runs through the feed as if the tripod itself had been nudged, and under the constant hum of the ventilation system, something else filters in. At first, it's easy to mistake for interference, a stuttering blip in the audio, but then the pattern becomes clear. Click, 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 3 distinct sounds, spaced evenly, slow, each one a little louder than the last. No one in the room reacts. The doctor's hands move steadily. The assistant continues writing, as though the sound doesn't exist for them at all. The audio returns to the steady hiss of the fan, but the air in the scene feels heavier now, as if the clicks have left something behind in the silence. The doctor moves to the lower cavity, isolating the liver. It slides free with less resistance than the lungs, but the moment it's exposed, the difference is clear. The surface is mottled in uneven shades, the edges discolored. A closer view shows faint channels scored into the tissue, shallow, winding paths that seem to have no anatomical purpose. He notes the weight and condition for the record, but there's a hesitation before placing it on the tray. The steel surface beneath the organs is now slick with pooled fluid. In monochrome, it's a deep matte gray, but the density of it is wrong. Heavier than normal blood, more cohesive. The camera catches a slow strand stretching from the edge of the liver down to the tray, clinging until it pulls taut and snaps. The strand doesn't break into droplets. It falls as one rope-like piece, curling onto the metal and holding its shape. The doctor finally speaks, his voice a fraction quieter. Blood viscosity, significantly increased, unusual cohesion, possible environmental effect. He trails off, not finishing the thought. The assistant moves to the counter, setting down her clipboard to prepare the next set of containers. Her movement brings her briefly into the periphery of the camera's view, and in that split second, at the far corner of the frame, there's something else. It's not clear. Just a pale, vertical shape, faint against the darker tiles, gone as quickly as it appeared. The picture steadies. No one looks toward it. The doctor removes smaller tissue samples next. Sections of stomach lining, strips of abdominal muscle. Some are placed directly into labeled jars. Others are laid out on the secondary tray for later analysis. Each cut releases more of the dark, thick fluid. It pools at the edges of the cavity, the surface broken only when his hands move through it. The audio flutters again, a brief ripple in the static. For a heartbeat, the pitch of the fan changes, not louder, just different, like it's carrying more than air. When the camera refocuses on the main tray, the frame seems sharper than before, the metallic edges almost too defined. The lungs, the liver, the smaller tissue samples, they glisten under the lights, but in the shadows between them, the darkness is absolute. The doctor glances once toward the far wall, not at the corner, not at the camera, but at something in between. His eyes linger there half a second too long before he returns to the task. More blood seeps from the cavity, running slowly toward the edge of the table. One drop gathers, stretching until it falls, landing in the tray below with a sound that is less a splash than a dull, sticky impact. The assistant retrieves a gauze pad, pressing it lightly against the area to slow the pooling. When she lifts it away, the gauze is saturated instantly, the dark fluid holding its shape instead of spreading. She doesn't comment. The doctor replaces the instruments neatly on the tray, his movements precise but measured, as though prolonging the moment before whatever comes next. The camera holds the frame for several seconds after his hands leave the body. The organs on the tray, the thick dark fluid, the open cavity on the table, all perfectly still. Then, so faint it could be imagined, the click comes again. Just once, this time. Louder. Fade to the steady hiss of the ventilation. The doctor pauses over the open abdominal cavity. His gloved hands hover in place, the metal tips of the forceps glinting in the overhead glare. Something inside has caught his attention, not a wound this time, not the texture of muscle or the pooling of that thick, ropey blood, but something harder. He shifts the retractors wider, the skin at the incision edges pulling taut. The camera's grain sharpens along the lines of the stretched tissue, the monochrome contrast, turning every contour into a shadow. The doctor leans in. His forceps dip deep into the cavity, probing gently until they find it, a solid resistance against the soft collapse of surrounding tissue. There's a faint metallic clink as the object is lifted free and brought into the light. It's not metal at all, though. The shape is unmistakable, even in black and white. A bone. Small, thin, no longer than 3 inches. The doctor rotates it in the forceps, and the proportions become clear. Narrow shaft, rounded end, the faint curvature of something designed to articulate with a joint. It's not a fragment from the ribs or any of the long bones in the victim's arms or legs. The texture is subtly different too, paler, smoother, as if the surface has been worn by something other than age. The assistant, standing just out of direct light, leans forward. "What is that?" The doctor doesn't answer immediately. His eyes trace the bone's length. The other end tapers slightly, a fracture line running clean through as though it was snapped under precise pressure. He lifts it closer to the camera. The lens responds with a slow, deliberate zoom, centering the object in the frame. For a fraction of a second, no more than half a heartbeat, the image buckles. Not blurred, but warped, stretching horizontally as if the frame itself were pulled sideways. The bone distorts into an oblong smear, the doctor's gloved hands widening unnaturally before snapping back into place. The moment is over in half a second, but it leaves a faint afterimage in the mind, like the echo of motion you can't unsee. The assistant speaks again, this time quieter. "Could it be from—" She stops mid-sentence, eyes flicking up to the doctor, then to the far corner of the room. Whatever she was going to say hangs there, unspoken. The doctor sets the bone down carefully on the tray beside the organs. The sound it makes is lighter than expected, not the dull knock of fresh bone, but the brittle tap of something dried, older. Overhead, the fluorescent light stutters, just once, a single blink, enough to momentarily deepen the shadows, enough to break the sterile stillness. When the light steadies again, there's something new in the frame. At the far right, just within the edge of the image, a shape has appeared. It's tall enough that the head nearly grazes the top of the frame, thin. The pale tone of it stands out even against the desaturated palette of the feed. It's flush against the wall, shoulders almost brushing the tile. The head is angled forward, not bowed in thought, but tilted, as though the neck has been bent beyond its natural range. And this time, it's facing the camera. No detail is visible in the face, if there is one. Just the faint impression of where the eyes should be, darker than the rest, set into the blank pallor. It doesn't move. It doesn't blink. The frame holds it perfectly, still while the doctor continues his work, oblivious. The assistant is the only one who shifts her stance, her weight rocking slightly back onto one foot, as if she's instinctively putting more distance between herself and that wall. She doesn't look at it directly, but her gaze keeps drifting there, just for a second at a time. The camera doesn't zoom toward it, doesn't refocus. It remains locked on the table, the open cavity, the small alien bone resting among the slick gray of the other organs. The pale figure stands in the periphery, just far enough to make you doubt your own eyes. The doctor begins to narrate for the record again, his voice even. Recovered foreign bone fragment, not matching victim anatomy. Length, 3.2 inches, possible phalangeal morphology. He hesitates on that last phrase, choosing his words carefully. Origin unknown. As he speaks, the static in the audio shifts, faintly at first, then in a way you can't ignore once you've noticed it. It has a pattern now. Not a constant hiss, but a low swell and retreat, almost like breathing slowed to an unnatural pace. The assistant finally turns back to her clipboard, jotting down the notes. But her writing is clipped, uneven, as though her focus is split between the page and that far corner of the room. In the tray, the bone rests against the slick curve of the liver. The camera's grain catches the wet surface of the organ, the sharp dryness of the bone beside it. There's no blood clinging to the bone, nothing to suggest it was torn free from fresh tissue. It looks placed there. The doctor glances toward the tray, then to the body, then back again, his brow furrowing. "We'll need comparative analysis," he says quietly. The light above hums, flickering faintly, not the single blink from before, but a slower pulse, as if the current is being drawn on by something else in the room. When the doctor leans over the cavity again, the figure at the wall is gone. No shift, no fade. One frame it's there, the next it isn't. The wall behind it is bare tile once more. Neither of them remarks on it. The doctor resumes his work, sliding the forceps back into the open cavity, his voice calm, his motions deliberate. But the assistant doesn't look away from that empty stretch of wall for several seconds longer than she needs to. The audio returns to its steady hiss, but the rhythm, that slow inhale, slow exhale, lingers under it, impossible to unhear now. The bone remains on the tray, a small, silent intrusion that feels far heavier than its size should allow. The doctor doesn't linger on the foreign bone any longer. He sets the forceps back into the metal tray with a soft, metallic clink, then adjusts his position toward the lower half of the body. The assistant shifts as well, stepping to the side so the camera can maintain a clear view. The sheet covering the victim's legs is peeled back, revealing pale, rigid flesh. The skin from the thigh down is marked, not by random abrasions, but by ordered violence. Parallel scratches run in sets of 3 and 4, each line sharp-edged and deep enough to have drawn blood, now long dried into dark, matte streaks. The doctor begins at the upper thigh. Multiple linear lacerations, uniform spacing, consistent depth. His gloved hand traces just above the surface of one set of marks, careful not to disturb the drying crust at the edges. The camera zooms slightly, bringing the ridges into stark focus. Even in monochrome, the contrast between skin and damage is clear. He works his way downward, documenting the injuries with the same clinical calm. The pattern is unnervingly consistent, each set of marks equidistant, as though applied by the same hand, or the same claws. As the doctor bends closer to inspect a cluster near the shin, something shifts in the feed. A fog creeps into the center of the frame, subtle at first, a soft haze like breath-fogging glass. The edges of the image warp slightly as the mist blooms, clouding the space between the lens and the table. For 2, maybe 3 seconds, the fog holds, swirling faintly. Then it dissipates, revealing the doctor's bent figure exactly where it had been, his hand steady over the victim's leg. Neither he nor the assistant reacts, but the audio does. The steady hum of the ventilation fans thickens with static, the pitch climbing in small, uneven steps. The hiss is no longer neutral background noise. It has weight now, a presence pressing in from the edges. Underneath, a new sound joins, faint at first but growing. A dry, sharp ch, ch, ch at irregular intervals, like the brittle crackle of an electrical arc somewhere just out of sight. The noise comes and goes, overlapping the static in bursts that feel almost timed to the doctor's movements. The assistant's posture begins to change. Her hands still move, jotting notes mechanically, but her eyes no longer hold on the body. They flick to the corners of the room, to the shadowed space under the overhead cabinets, to the far wall, the same wall where, not long ago, something else had been standing. Each glance is quick, almost subconscious, as though she's checking for movement without wanting to admit she's doing it. The static swells again, louder, rougher, before settling. The doctor moves down to the ankle, recording the last of the parallel wounds. His voice is level, the same clinical tone, but the cadence is tighter, the words clipped. Then, the frame jumps. A single freeze, half a second, maybe less. When the feed unlocks, something has changed. The doctor is still bent over the table, his hands steady. The assistant stands where she was, head tilted slightly toward her notes. But behind him, filling the narrow space between his back and the wall, a figure looms. It is taller than him by a full head, though its posture is hunched forward, the shoulders angling sharply down toward the table. The arms hang too long, fingers, or something like them, dangling in the edge of the light. The head is lowered, angled toward the exposed body as though studying it. Even in monochrome, its pallor is stark, almost luminous. No facial detail is visible. Where eyes should be, the shadow's too deep. It's close enough that, if it were to straighten, its chest would press against the doctor's back. Neither of them reacts. The assistant doesn't look up. The doctor doesn't shift. The figure doesn't move. The camera holds, the image unblinking, the static low but constant. Then, without any sign of motion, the figure is gone. No step back, no turn, just absence, the wall bare tile again in the very next frame. The doctor straightens slightly, placing his tools back on the tray, his mask hiding whatever expression might have crossed his face. The assistant finally looks up from her clipboard, not at the wall, but at him, as though checking for something unspoken. The static begins to thin, the faint electric crackle fading with it. The ventilation hum returns to its normal pitch. The camera holds on the table for several long seconds, as though waiting for something else to appear. Nothing does. For now. The overhead light hums, faint at first, then sharpens into a high, thin whine. The fluorescents begin to stutter, their white glare cutting in and out at a rhythm too fast to track. Shadows snap and vanish in half-second bursts, flickering over the steel table and the pale stillness of the body. The ventilation hum is gone. In its place, the static swells, not as a hiss now, but as slow, crushing waves of noise. Each rise rolls over the room like pressure building in your ears. Each fall drags the air thinner, leaving a gap before the next swell slams in. Within seconds, the sound has consumed everything. The soft rustle of latex, the scrape of metal on metal, the faint shifting of shoes on tile. Gone, buried. The camera reacts in small, uneven tremors. The frame quivers, the edges vibrating with a jitter that seems to come from inside the lens rather than from any movement in the room. The placard, subject R09, classified, vibrates in place, its letters blurring in the shake. And then, a flash. Pure white fills the feed, the kind of overexposure that should burn your eyes, even through the grain. It holds for barely a second, maybe less, before detail floods back in. The table, the body, the doctor and assistant in the same positions. Except something is different. The victim's right hand, fingers that had been frozen into an unnatural curl, now twitch. A small, sharp contraction, like a reflex, but too controlled, too intentional. The movement is slight, but in the lockdown stillness of the shot, it's impossible to miss. Neither the doctor nor the assistant reacts. The doctor's head is bent toward his instruments. The assistant is writing, not even a pause in her hand. The fingers twitch again. This time, the index drags a fraction of an inch across the steel. The sound doesn't carry over the static, but the camera catches the shift, the subtle scrape as skin meets metal. And then, a sound breaks through. Click, so close it's almost inside the mic, sharp enough to spike the audio into distortion. If there were a waveform visible, it would blow past its limits, a jagged pillar swallowing the track. The static crushes down in its wake, the waves tightening, the rise and fall growing steeper. The camera shakes harder now, the image threatening to tear at the edges. For a moment, the body moves again. The hand flexes, the fingers opening just enough to show the broken nails in full. One thumb bends back, slow and deliberate, before the motion stops, mid-extension. The click comes again, louder. The screen breaks, not into black, but into noise, thick bands of distortion tearing across the frame, each one pulling the image sideways before snapping back. For a split second between the tearing lines, the face of the victim is visible, and the jaw isn't where it should be. It's open wider now, much wider. The assistant keeps writing. The doctor adjusts his grip on a scalpel. Neither looks up. The third click hits like a physical blow. The distortion fractures the frame into a mosaic of frozen fragments, flashes of the table, the wall, a pale vertical blur that might be standing between them and the camera. The noise peaks, and then silence. Everything drops out at once, the sound, the shake, the light flicker. The feed steadies, just long enough for you to see the victim's hand lying flat now, the fingers splayed in a way they hadn't been since the sheet was pulled back. The static erupts again, violent and full screen this time. It consumes the frame, a roiling mass of black and white grain that surges in chaotic waves. The image inside it is gone. Nothing but the shifting snow of interference. The distortion pulses once, twice, and then collapses to black. For a few seconds there is nothing, and then white text fades in, sharp and clean against the darkness. Subject R09. Examination incomplete. Termination due to unstable environment. The letters hold for 3 beats before dissolving. Another line appears. Recovered audio log from Glenwood Motel maintenance staff. It stays long enough for you to read it twice, and then fades into the same black where the footage began. The tape ends. Tape